Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched his world die. The massive alien ships moved through space like dark clouds, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly fire. Each blast tore through human defenses as if they were made of paper. The Zephyrian Armada had arrived 3 hours ago, and already half of Earth's orbital stations were gone. "Sir, we're getting reports from the surface," called out Communications Officer Linda Torres from her station. Her voice shook as she read the incoming messages. "New Chicago is under heavy bombardment. They're requesting immediate evacuation. Support." Jake's heart stopped. New Chicago was where his family lived. His wife Lisa worked at the medical center downtown, and their daughter Amy was at school just a few blocks away. He had spoken to them that morning before the attack began. Lisa had been making breakfast while Amy complained about her math homework, normal things, safe things, things that seemed impossible now. "Captain Ryan Cooper is requesting orders." "Sir," Torres continued. "The evacuation ships are ready, but they need escort through the Zephyrian blockade." Jake looked at the tactical display. The alien ships were massive, each one the size of a small city. They moved with purpose and coordination that human forces could not match. The Zephyrians had been fighting humanity for 3 years now, and in every battle they proved superior. Their weapons cut through human shields like they were not there. Their armor absorbed human fire without damage. Their ships moved faster and hit harder than anything Earth could build. "Tell Captain Cooper we're moving to support," Jake ordered. "All ships form up on the Liberty. We're going to punch a hole through their line." The bridge crew worked quickly to prepare for battle. Jake watched the enemy formation and tried to find a weakness. The Zephyrians always fought the same way. They formed perfect geometric patterns that covered every angle of attack. Their ships supported each other in ways that made it almost impossible to break through. But almost impossible was not the same as impossible. "Sir, incoming transmission." "From Earth Defense Command," Torres announced. "Admiral Kate Sullivan wants to speak with you directly." Jake accepted the call, and Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen. She looked tired and older than her 50 years. The war had been hard on everyone, but command officers bore the worst of it. They had to make decisions that sent good people to die. "Jake, I need you to know the situation down there is bad," Sullivan said without introduction. "The Zephyrians are not just bombing military targets. They're hitting civilian areas, hospitals, schools, residential blocks. This is not conquest. This is extermination." "Understood, Admiral," Jake replied. "We're moving to support the evacuation now." "There's something else," Sullivan continued. "Our intelligence people have been studying their attack patterns. They think the Zephyrians are testing something new. These attacks are more coordinated than before, more precise. Like they're building up to something bigger." Jake nodded, but his mind was focused on one thing. He needed to get those evacuation ships through the blockade. He needed to get to New Chicago. He needed to find his family. "Liberty. Moving to attack position," he announced to his crew. "All weapons ready? Engine room? Give me everything you have?" Chief Engineer Sam Parker's voice came through the comm system. "You've got full power, sir. But I don't know how long we can maintain it under heavy fire." "Just get us through, Sam," Jake said. The Liberty accelerated toward the Zephyrian line, with 12 other human ships following. Jake knew most of them would not survive this fight. The enemy ships were already turning to face them. Weapon ports opened along their dark hulls like glowing eyes. In seconds, the space between the fleets would be filled with deadly energy. "Incoming transmission from the surface," Torres called out. "It's on your personal channel?" Jake's hands shook as he accepted the call. Lisa's face appeared on his personal screen. She was in what looked like a shelter or basement. Amy was beside her, crying quietly. Behind them, Jake could see other families huddled together in fear. "Jake, thank God," Lisa said. "The bombing is getting worse. The whole downtown area is gone. Amy's school was hit, but she was already homesick. We're in the emergency shelter under the medical center." "Lisa, listen to me," Jake said quickly. "The evacuation ships are coming. You need to get to the spaceport as soon as the bombing Stops. Don't wait. Don't try to bring anything. Just get Amy and run. I love you, Lisa said. Tears ran down her face. Please be careful up there. I love you too, both of you. I'm going to get you out of there. The transmission cut to static as a massive explosion shook the shelter. Jake stared at the empty screen for a moment before forcing himself to focus on the battle ahead. All ships, attack formation Beta, he ordered. Target their left flank. If we can break through there, the evacuation ships can reach the surface. The Liberty opened fire along with the rest of the human fleet. Their weapons lit up the enemy ships but did little damage. Zephyrian shields absorbed most of the energy and their thick armor stopped the rest. In return, the alien weapons tore through human ships like they were made of glass. The destroyer Harrison exploded first. Then, the cruiser New York took a direct hit to its engine room. One by one, Jake's ships were dying while barely scratching the enemy. But they kept fighting, they had to. Below them on Earth, millions of people were depending on them. Sir, we've lost 8 ships, Torres reported. The remaining vessels are requesting permission to withdraw. Negative, Jake said. We hold the line until the evacuation ships are clear. Another transmission came through from the surface, but this time it was just noise and static. The signal was breaking up. Jake tried to reach Lisa again but got no response. The bombing had intensified. The shelter might have taken a direct hit. Sir, massive explosion detected over New Chicago, the sensor operator announced. The entire city center is gone. Jake felt something break inside him. The screen showed a mushroom cloud rising from where his family had been, where millions of people had been. The evacuation ships had not made it in time. No one had made it in time. Sir, the Zephyrians are launching a full assault, Torres called out. All remaining human ships are taking heavy damage. Jake looked around the bridge. Half his crew was dead or wounded. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The lights flickered as power systems failed. Through the viewports he could see the Liberty's escort ships burning in space. Soon his ship would join them. All hands abandon ship, he ordered. Get to the escape pods. Sir, what about you? Torres asked. I'll be right behind you, Jake lied. Someone had to make sure the evacuation data reached Mars Colony. Someone had to tell them what happened here. What the Zephyrians were really doing. As his crew fled to safety, Jake sat alone on the bridge of his dying ship. Below him, Earth burned. Above him, the alien fleet moved on to finish what they had started. His family was gone. His world was gone. Everything he had fought to protect was turning to ash and radiation. The Liberty's hull split open and Jake was thrown toward the escape pod bay. As he flew through the corridors, he could hear the ship breaking apart around him. Metal screamed against metal. Atmosphere rushed out through 1,000 holes. The lights went out and emergency power cast everything in red shadows. Jake reached the last working escape pod just as the Liberty's reactor went critical. He sealed himself inside and launched into space. Through the small viewport, he watched his ship explode in a ball of white fire. Then he watched the Zephyrian fleet turn toward Mars Colony. Toward humanity's last hope. He had lost everything in the war. His family, his ship, his crew, his world. But somehow he was still alive, still breathing, still able to fight. The Zephyrians thought they had won, but they were wrong. As long as one human remained, the war would continue. And Jake Morrison was not done fighting. 6 months had passed since Earth fell and Jake Morrison had become a ghost. He walked through the corridors of Mars Colony like a man who had forgotten how to live. People whispered when they saw him coming and moved out of his way. They knew. His story. Everyone knew his story. The man who lost everything fighting to save a world that could not be saved. Dr. Peter Walsh tried to help him. The colony's head psychiatrist had seen many broken soldiers, but Jake was different. Most men who lost their families in the war eventually found ways to move forward. They grieved and healed and learned to hope again. Jake had stopped at the grieving part and built walls around himself that no one could break through. You need to talk to someone, Peter said during one of their sessions. Keeping all this pain inside is killing you. Jake sat in the chair across from Peter's desk and stared at nothing. His uniform was clean but hung loose on his thin frame. He had stopped eating regular meals weeks ago. Sleep came in short bursts, filled with nightmares about burning cities and silent communication channels. "What's the point?" Jake asked. "Lisa and Amy are dead. Earth is dead. In a few months the Zephyrians will come here and Mars will be dead too. Then there won't be anyone left to remember them." "That's not true," Peter said. "We're building new defenses. Admiral Sullivan thinks we can hold them off." Jake laughed. But there was no humor in it. "With what? We threw everything we had at them and they brushed us aside like insects. They're not just stronger than us. They're better at war than we could ever be." Peter leaned forward in his chair. "Then help. You just understand them. You fought them more than anyone. You know how they think." "No," Jake said. "I know how they kill. There's a difference." After the session, Jake walked to the colony archives. This had become his routine. Every day he came here to study enemy reports and battle recordings. The archive staff had given up trying to make him leave. He would sit at the same terminal for hours reading about Zephyrian tactics and technology. Looking for something that everyone else had missed, the archives were quiet except for the hum of computer systems. Most people avoided coming here. The records it contained were too painful. 3 years of defeats and disasters. Entire fleets wiped out in minutes. Planets turned to radioactive waste. Millions of people reduced to statistical reports. Jake pulled up the latest intelligence briefings from the outer colonies. The Zephyrians had been busy since taking Earth. They were not content to occupy human worlds. They were changing them, stripping away the atmosphere and breaking down the surface into raw materials. But for what purpose? They had their own worlds, their own resources. Why did they need to destroy everything humans had built? A new report caught his attention. It came from a deep space monitoring station that had somehow avoided detection. The operators had been watching Zephyrian fleet movements for weeks. What they found made Jake's blood run cold. The aliens were not just conquering human space, they were harvesting it. Every planet they took was being systematically consumed. The organic material was processed into some kind of fuel or food source. The metals and minerals were shaped into new ships and weapons. Even the humans themselves were being processed, converted into biomass for the Zephyrian war machine. Jake read the report 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. The Zephyrians were not conquerors in any sense that humans could understand. They were more like a disease, a plague that consumed everything in its path and used it to spread further. Every victory made them stronger. Every world they took gave them resources to take more worlds. He accessed the colony's main database and started cross-referencing the report with older intelligence files. What he found painted a picture that was even worse than he had imagined. The war against humanity was just the latest in a long series of wars. The Zephyrians had been doing this for centuries, maybe longer. Every spacefaring species in their region of the galaxy had eventually fallen to them, but there had to be a weakness. No species could be perfect at war. No technology could be completely invulnerable. Jake started studying the technical analyses of captured Zephyrian equipment. Most of it was too advanced for human scientists to understand completely, but they had learned some basic facts. Zephyrian technology was organic. Their ships were grown rather than built. Their weapons were living creatures that fired concentrated energy. Even their armor was some kind of biological material that could repair itself. This made them incredibly resilient, but it also meant they followed biological rules. Jake spent days reading about how their systems worked. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that there was a pattern he was missing. Something about how their ships coordinated their attacks, how they moved in perfect formation even across vast distances, how they seemed to think and act as one giant organism. The breakthrough came when he was studying wreckage from a Zephyrian scout ship. The engineering team had been trying to understand its communication system. They knew the aliens used some form of quantum entanglement to send messages instantly across any distance. But what they had not realized was that this was not just communication. It was something much more fundamental. Every Zephyrian ship was connected to every other ship through quantum links. They did not just talk to each other. They shared thoughts, memories, experiences. The entire fleet operated as a single consciousness, distributed across thousands of vessels. This explained their perfect coordination, their ability to adapt instantly to human tactics, their seeming inability to make mistakes. Jake stared at the data on his screen and felt something he had not experienced in months: hope. If the Zephyrians were really one giant mind, then they had the same weakness as any mind. They could be confused, overloaded, driven insane. He started researching human neural patterns in quantum physics. The colony had some of the best scientists in human space working on defensive projects. Jake convinced them to help him understand how consciousness worked at the quantum level, how thoughts could be transmitted through entangled particles, how a foreign pattern might disrupt an established network. The work took weeks, but eventually Jake had his answer. Human consciousness was fundamentally different from what the Zephyrians used. Humans thought as individuals even when they worked. Together, their brains created unique quantum signatures that had never been seen in the Zephyrian network. If he could introduce human thought patterns into their collective mind, it might cause a cascade failure, but there was a problem. To inject the virus into their network, he would need direct access to a Zephyrian command ship. These vessels were the nodes that coordinated entire fleets. They were heavily defended and never came close to human forces. Getting to one would be suicide. Jake did not care. He had lost everything that mattered to him. If he could use his death to hurt the aliens who killed his family, then it would be worth it. But first he needed to convince someone in authority to approve the mission. Admiral Sullivan listened to his proposal with the patience of someone who had heard many desperate plans. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally she spoke. Jake, I understand why you want to do this. But what you're describing sounds like the fantasy of a grieving man. Even if your theory about their consciousness is correct, how do you plan to reach their command ship? How do you plan to survive long enough to deploy this virus? We captured one of their scout ships last month, Jake said. The engineering team thinks they can make it operational. If we use it to approach their fleet, we might be able to get close enough. Might, Sullivan repeated. You're asking me to approve a suicide mission based on might. Yes, Jake said simply. Because the alternative is waiting here for them to come and harvest us too. Sullivan looked at the reports on her desk. Intelligence estimated that the Zephyrian fleet would reach Mars in less than 6 months. The colony's defenses would not hold them for more than a few days. After that, humanity would be extinct. If I approve this mission, you won't be going alone, she said finally. I'll need volunteers. People who understand they're not coming back. I'll find them, Jake promised. Over the next few weeks, Jake assembled his team. They were all people who had lost everything to the Zephyrians. People who had reached the same conclusion he had. That dying in an attempt to hurt their enemies was better than waiting to be harvested. Captain Ryan Cooper had been his roommate at the academy. His ship had been destroyed in the same battle where Jake lost the Liberty. Chief Engineer Sam Parker had lost his entire family when the Zephyrians bombed Luna City. Communications specialist Linda Torres had volunteered immediately when she heard about the mission. Her reason was simple. She wanted to make them pay. Dr. Peter Walsh was the surprise volunteer. Jake had not expected the psychiatrist to want to join a combat mission, but Peter had his own reasons for wanting to fight. I've been studying their attack patterns from a psychological perspective, Peter explained. I think I understand how their collective consciousness works. You'll need someone who can help guide the virus through their network. Jake accepted him onto the team. They would need every advantage they could get. The Zephyrian command ship would be unlike anything humans had ever faced. It would be defended by weapons they did not understand and filled with enemies that thought as one. The briefing room was small and cramped, but it felt like the most important place in the galaxy. Admiral Sullivan stood at the front looking at the 5 volunteers who had accepted what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Jake Morrison sat with his team and tried to ignore the weight of their stares. These people trusted him with their lives even though his plan might be completely wrong. Intelligence confirms that the Zephyrian main fleet will reach Mars in 4 months, Sullivan began. Our defensive preparations will be complete in 3 months. Even with our best estimates, we can only hold them off for a few weeks at most. She activated the holographic display and the room filled with images of enemy ships. Massive dark vessels that looked more like living creatures than machines. Their surfaces rippled with organic patterns and pulsed with internal light. Just looking at them made Jake remember the day Earth died. This is their command ship, Sullivan continued as the display focused on one vessel. It's roughly 10 times larger than our biggest ships and appears to be the central node for their fleet. Coordination. If Jake's theory is correct, then this ship contains the core consciousness that controls all other Zephyrian forces. Captain Ryan Cooper raised his hand. What about defenses? How do we even get close to something like that? The captured scout ship, Jake answered. Sam and his team have been working on it for weeks. They think they can make it functional enough to fool the Zephyrian sensors for a short time. Chief Engineer Sam Parker nodded grimly. The biological systems are incredibly complex, but we've managed to keep the basic functions running. Navigation, life support, communications. The problem is that we don't really understand how it works. We're basically flying blind. How long do we have once we're inside their formation? Asked communications specialist Linda Torres. Minutes. At best, Sullivan replied. Maybe an hour if we're incredibly lucky. The moment they realize what we're doing, they'll destroy us. Dr. Peter Walsh leaned forward in his chair. Tell them about the virus, Jake. They need to understand what we're really trying to do. Jake stood and walked to the display controls. The hologram changed to show complex diagrams of neural networks and quantum patterns. Most of the people in the room would not understand the technical details, but they needed to know what they were fighting for. Human consciousness works differently than theirs, Jake explained. We think as individuals. Our brains create unique quantum signatures that are completely foreign to their collective network. If we can introduce these patterns into their command system, it should cause a cascade failure. Should, repeated Admiral Sullivan. This entire plan is built on should and maybe impossibly. Are you asking me to send 5 good people to die on a theory? Yes, Jake said without hesitation, because the theory is all we have. In 4 months they'll be here, and then humanity will be extinct. This might be our only chance to hurt them. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. She had been fighting this war since it started 3 years ago. She had watched dozens of worlds fall, and millions of people die. She had sent countless soldiers on missions that seemed impossible, and most of them had not come back. But this was different. This was not about winning a battle or saving a planet. This was about the survival of their entire species. The mission is approved, she said finally. But I want everyone to understand something. If you succeed, the war doesn't end. Even if you cripple their main fleet, there are other Zephyrian forces scattered across the galaxy. This buys us time, nothing more. Time is all we need, Jake replied. Time to learn from what we discover. Time to build better defenses. Time to find other weaknesses we can exploit. Over the next 2 weeks, the team prepared for their mission. They studied every piece of intelligence about Zephyrian ships and tactics. They practiced using the alien scout vessel's controls until they could operate them in their sleep. They rehearsed their assault plan until every movement was automatic. The hardest part was learning to work as a team again. Jake had been isolated for months, and the others were dealing with their own losses. Ryan drank too much and blamed himself for losing his ship. Sam worked 18-hour days trying to understand alien technology that made no sense. Linda barely spoke to anyone except during briefings. Peter tried to help them all, but his own grief was eating him alive. We're falling apart before we even start, Ryan said one evening after a particularly bad training session. Maybe we should find different people for this mission. There are no different people, Jake replied. Everyone left alive has lost someone to the Zephyrians. Everyone is carrying damage. We just have to learn to work through it. They were sitting in the colony's observation lounge, looking out at the red landscape of Mars. Earth was visible as a blue dot in the distance, but they all knew it was dead now. Stripped bare by alien harvesters and turned into raw material for their war machine. Tell me about your family, Linda said suddenly. I mean, if you want to. Sometimes it helps to talk about the people we've lost. Jake hesitated. He had not spoken about Lisa and Amy to anyone since they died, that these people were going to die with him. They deserved to know why he was so determined to make the aliens pay. Lisa was a doctor, he said quietly. She worked in emergency medicine and saved people's lives every day. She was brilliant and kind, and she believed that every person mattered. Amy was 8 years old, and she wanted to be a pilot like her dad. She used to build model spaceships and fly them around the house making engine noises. They sound wonderful, Linda said. They were. And now they're gone because I couldn't protect them. Because I wasn't good enough or fast enough or smart enough to save them. Peter leaned forward. That's not your fault, Jake. None of us could have stopped what happened to Earth. Maybe not, Jake said. But I can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. I can make the Zephyrians pay for what they took from us. Sam nodded slowly. My wife and kids were on Luna when the Zephyrians hit it. The colony was supposed to be safe, underground and hidden, but they found it anyway. Killed everyone and harvested the bodies for biomass. Ryan took a long drink from his bottle. My crew trusted me to bring them home. 37 good people who followed my orders right into an alien trap. I watched them die one by one and couldn't do anything to save them. Linda was quiet for a while before speaking. I had a younger brother named Danny. He was serving on a colony ship heading for the outer systems when the war started. The ship went missing 6 months ago. I know what happened to it. The Zephyrians don't take prisoners. Peter was the last to speak. I've been treating soldiers with post-traumatic stress for 2 years, watching the war break good people into pieces. My job was to help them heal, but how do you heal from something like this? How do you move forward when your entire species is dying? They sat in silence for a while after that. Outside the observation windows, Mars looked cold and empty. Beautiful in its own way, but not really alive. Not like Earth had been. Not like any of the worlds the Zephyrians had destroyed. We're not going to make it back from this mission, Jake said eventually. Everyone knows that. But maybe we can do something that matters. Maybe we can give humanity a chance to survive. And if we can't, Ryan asked, then at least we tried. At least we fought back instead of just waiting to die. The final week of preparation passed quickly. The captured scout ship was as ready as it would ever be. The quantum virus was programmed and tested. The assault plan was memorized and rehearsed. All that remained was to say goodbye. Jake recorded a final message for any humans who might survive the coming battle. He talked about why they were making this attempt and what they hoped to accomplish. He talked about the importance of never giving up even when everything seemed hopeless. He talked about Lisa and Amy and all the other people who had died fighting for humanity's future. We are 5 volunteers going into the heart of darkness, he said to the recording device. We don't expect to come back. But we want you to know that we're not afraid, we're angry, we're determined. And we believe that even one small act of defiance can change the course of history. The morning of their departure, Admiral Sullivan came to see them off. She shook hands with each team member and thanked them for their service. When she reached Jake, she held his gaze for a long moment. I want you to know that if you succeed, this mission will be remembered forever, she said. Children will learn your names in school. Songs will be written about what you tried to do here. And if we fail? Jake asked. Then there won't be anyone left to remember anything, Sullivan replied. So don't fail. The scout ship was small and cramped compared to human vessels. Its organic walls pulsed with alien life and strange lights flickered in patterns none of them understood. But it was their only way to reach the Zephyrian fleet without being destroyed immediately. Jake took his position at what they thought was the pilot's station. The controls were unlike anything in human technology. Soft surfaces that responded to touch and thought rather than physical pressure. Display screens that showed information in symbols that hurt to look at directly. All systems show green, Sam reported from the engineering station. As green as we can tell anyway. Life support is stable, engines are responding to commands. Communications are active. The Zephyrian fleet filled space like a dark ocean. Jake had seen recordings of their formations before, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of being among them. Hundreds of massive ships moved in perfect synchronization, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Each vessel was the size of a city, and they stretched out in all directions as far as the sensors could detect. "Sweet Mother of God," Ryan whispered from the co-pilot seat. "There are so many of them." Jake kept his hands steady on the alien controls. As their captured scout ship drifted deeper into the formation, the other vessels seemed to accept their presence without question. Or maybe they were being watched and evaluated in ways humans could not understand. Either way, they were still alive and moving toward their target. "Command ship is 2 kilometers ahead," Linda reported from the communications station. "It's even bigger than our estimates suggested. Roughly 30 kilometers long and maybe 8 kilometers wide." The vessel appeared on their forward display, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. It was not just a ship. It was a living mountain floating in space. Its surface writhed with organic textures and glowed with internal fires. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing holes. Sensor arrays swept back and forth like searching eyes. "I'm reading massive energy signatures," Sam called from engineering. "This thing has enough firepower to destroy entire planets by itself. And we're going to fly right into it," Peter added with nervous humor. "At least we'll have the element of surprise." Jake guided their scout ship toward what looked like a docking bay on the command ship's underside. The opening was large enough to accommodate several vessels, and organic mechanisms reached out to guide them into position. Everything moved with fluid precision that made human technology seem clumsy by comparison. "Docking clamps are engaging," Sam reported. "Atmosphere is equalizing. We're locked in place." "This is it," Jake said to his team. "From here on, we're inside their stronghold. Everyone knows the plan. We stick together until we reach the central core, then Linda and Ryan hold the rear while Sam, Peter, and I deploy the virus." They gathered their equipment and moved to the scout ship's airlock. Jake carried the quantum virus in a specially designed container that looked more like a biological sample than a weapon. Sam had his engineering tools and explosives for clearing obstacles. Linda and Ryan were armed with human weapons that probably would not work very well against Zephyrian technology, but were better than nothing. Peter carried medical supplies and his research on alien psychology. The airlock opened onto a corridor that seemed to have grown rather than been built. The walls were smooth organic surfaces that pulsed with rhythmic light. The air smelled of ozone and something else that hurt Jake's nose when he breathed it. Strange sounds echoed from deeper in the ship, clicking and humming and whispers in frequencies that made his teeth ache. "Which way?" Ryan asked. Jake consulted the scanner Sam had modified to detect quantum signatures. The readings were confusing, but there seemed to be a massive concentration of activity toward the ship's center. That had to be where they would find the core consciousness. "Follow me and stay quiet," Jake said. "We don't know how they detect intruders." They moved through corridors that twisted and branched like blood vessels. The walls were warm to the touch, and sometimes Jake could feel them moving slightly as if breathing. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows that shifted and danced. It was like walking through the inside of some impossibly large creature. "Motion ahead," Linda whispered. A group of Zephyrian soldiers rounded a corner and stopped when they saw the humans. For a moment, both sides stared at each other in surprise. The aliens were tall and thin, with elongated limbs and faces that were more insect than mammal. Their skin was dark and textured like leather. Their eyes were multifaceted and reflected light in disturbing ways. Jake raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the aliens made high-pitched clicking sounds and rushed forward. Ryan opened fire with his rifle while Linda used her sidearm to cover their flanks. The human weapons did damage, but not as much as they had hoped. The Zephyrian soldiers were tough, and their natural armor absorbed most of the impacts. "Move!" Jake shouted. "We can't afford to get bogged down here." Some threw an explosive charge behind them as they ran deeper into the ship. The explosion echoed through the corridors, and Jake could hear more alien voices responding from multiple directions. Their infiltration had been discovered. From now on, they would be fighting every step of the way. The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with organic machinery. Huge structures that looked like organs pumped fluids through transparent tubes. Nerve-like cables carried electrical impulses between different sections. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of growth. "This must be part of their life support system," Peter said as they ran between the massive components. "The whole ship is alive." More Zephyrian soldiers appeared from side passages. These ones carried weapons that fired concentrated energy bursts. The air around Jake crackled with ionization as alien fire missed him by inches. He dove behind cover and returned fire while his team scattered to avoid being surrounded. "We need to keep moving," Sam called out. "Every second we waste here gives them more time to organize their defenses." They fought their way through 3 more chambers before reaching what seemed to be a main transport shaft. It stretched both up and down farther than their lights could penetrate. Organic lifts moved along its walls, carrying supplies and personnel to different levels of the ship. "The quantum readings are strongest above us," Jake said after checking his scanner. "Maybe 15 levels up." They climbed onto one of the lifts and Jake tried to make it rise toward their destination. The controls were intuitive once he stopped, thinking about them as technology, and started treating them like parts of a living creature. The lift responded to his touch and began moving upward. "Contact below," Ryan reported. "Lots of them." Jake looked down the shaft and saw alien soldiers swarming onto other lifts. They were moving fast and would reach the humans in minutes, but 15 levels was a long way to climb, and they might not have that much time. "Sam, can you slow them down?" Jake asked. The engineer nodded and started placing explosive charges on the lift support structures as they passed. The devices would not destroy the shaft, but they might damage it enough to delay pursuit. Every few seconds, Sam dropped another charge until he ran out of explosives. "That's all I have," he said. "Whatever we're going to do, we better do it fast." The lift reached their target level, and they stepped off into another corridor. This one was different from the others, wider and more ornate with walls that sparkled with embedded crystals. Strange symbols covered every surface, and Jake could feel energy flowing through them like electricity through wires. "We're close," Peter said. "I can sense it. There's something massive ahead of us. Something that thinks on a scale we can barely imagine." They moved quickly through chambers filled with alien technology that defied human understanding. Devices that seemed to bend space around themselves. Screens showing star maps of galaxies far beyond human space. Computing systems that processed information using quantum effects and biological neural networks. The final chamber took Jake's breath away. It was enormous, easily a kilometer across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. At the center stood a structure that was part building and part organism. It pulsed with light and energy while thousands of nerve cables connected it to every other system in the ship. "The central core," Jake said quietly. "That's where we deploy the virus." But between them and their target stood an army of Zephyrian defenders. They filled the chamber floor and clung to the walls and ceiling like insects. Hundreds of soldiers with energy weapons trained on the 5 humans who had dared to invade their most sacred space. "Well," Ryan said with forced humor, "at least we made it this far." The aliens did not attack immediately. Instead, they waited as a larger figure emerged from the central structure. This Zephyrian was different from the others, taller and more elaborate with skin that shifted colors and patterns. When it spoke, its voice echoed in frequencies that made the human's bones vibrate. "You are the ones who stole our vessel," it said in accented but understandable English. "You are the ones who killed our scouts and violated our sacred spaces. Why have you come here to die?" Jake stepped forward with the virus container in his hands. Around him, his team spread out to cover the approaches to the core. They had perhaps minutes before the alien reinforcements arrived from below. "We came to make you pay," Jake said simply. "You destroyed our world. You killed our families. You turned our people into biomass for your war machine. Now we're going to return the favor." The large Zephyrian made sounds that might have been laughter. "You are 5 individuals against the collective consciousness of our entire species. You have no weapons that can harm us. No knowledge that can help you. What can you possibly do?" "This," Jake said, and he sprinted toward the central core. The chamber erupted in energy fire as hundreds of aliens opened fire at once. Ryan and Linda returned fire while moving to flank the main group of defenders. Sam threw his remaining explosives to create gaps in their formation. Jake Morrison's consciousness exploded across the galaxy like a supernova of human thought. Every Zephyrian ship in their vast fleet suddenly experienced something they had never encountered before: individual identity, personal memory, the pain of loss and the power of love. Emotions that had no place in their collective mind but could not be stopped or contained. On the bridge of the Zephyrian command ship, the large alien who had spoken to Jake collapsed as foreign thoughts invaded its mind. Images of a human woman making breakfast, a child building model spaceships, the grief of watching a world burn. These memories belonged to a creature the Zephyrian had considered inferior, but now they were part of its own consciousness, and it could not make them stop. Throughout the chamber, other aliens writhed in confusion as their shared thoughts became chaotic. Some fell to the floor clutching their heads. Others made sounds of distress that had never been heard from their species before. The perfect unity that had made them unstoppable was fracturing like glass under pressure. On Mars Colony, Admiral Kate Sullivan watched her tactical displays with growing amazement. One by one, the dots representing Zephyrian ships began changing color from hostile red to neutral yellow. Not destroyed, not retreating, simply stopped. As if their crews had forgotten how to function. "What's happening out there?" she asked her operations officer. "Unknown, Admiral. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations throughout their fleet. Their formation is breaking apart. Some ships are firing on others. It's like they've lost all coordination." Sullivan thought about Jake Morrison and his desperate plan. She had not really believed it would work. The idea of disrupting an entire alien fleet with a computer virus had seemed like the fantasy of a grieving man. But something was definitely happening to the Zephyrians, and the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. "Get me a communication channel to their fleet," she ordered. "If they're having some kind of breakdown, maybe we can negotiate a ceasefire." But the Zephyrians were beyond negotiation. Across their massive armada, ship after ship was experiencing the same catastrophic failure. Crews that had thought as one mind for centuries suddenly found themselves thinking as individuals. The quantum network that connected them was overloaded with human memories and emotions that their collective consciousness could not process. Captain Zektar of the destroyer Night's Edge felt his mind splitting apart as foreign thoughts invaded his consciousness. He saw images of human children playing in gardens under alien suns. He felt the warmth of a mother's love for her offspring. He experienced the pain of losing someone precious and the determination to protect those who remained. These were not Zephyrian concepts, but somehow they were now part of him. Around the bridge, his crew was experiencing the same transformation. Communications Officer Veltha was sobbing, though she did not understand why. Engineer Morcus was staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Weapons Officer Drakelon was asking questions that had no answers in their collective knowledge. "Why do we harvest other species?" Drakelon asked. "What gives us the right to consume entire civilizations?" These were dangerous thoughts. Thoughts that had never existed in the Zephyrian collective. But they were spreading through the quantum network faster than they could be contained. Every ship in the fleet was being infected with human individuality and doubt on the heavy cruiser blood. Moon, Captain Heckenel tried to maintain control as his crew descended into chaos. Half of them were asking questions about their mission, while the others demanded they return to their homeworlds to see families they had never thought about before. The concept of family itself was alien to Zephyrian culture, but now it burned in their minds like an unquenchable fire. All ships maintain formation, Heckenel broadcast on the fleet command frequency. Resume attack on the human colony. These thoughts are not real. They are weapons designed to confuse us. But his own words sounded hollow, even to himself. How could thoughts be weapons? How could memories that felt so vivid and real be artificial constructs? The humans in these visions seemed more alive than any Zephyrian had ever felt throughout the fleet. Similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of ships. Crews that had operated with perfect efficiency were now paralyzed by doubt and confusion. Some vessels stopped moving entirely as their crews struggled to understand what was happening to them. Others began firing randomly at nearby ships as competing thoughts created conflict within their minds. The breakdown accelerated as Jake's consciousness continued to spread through their network. Every new ship that was infected became a transmission point for human memories. The virus replicated itself using the very system it was designed to destroy. Soon there was no part of the Zephyrian fleet that remained unaffected on the battleship. Starkiller, Commander Thekvar, made a decision that would have been impossible just hours before. He ordered his ship to withdraw from the attack formation and return to Zephyrian space. His crew, equally confused by their new individual thoughts, obeyed without question. They needed time to understand what had happened to them. Similar decisions were being made throughout the fleet. Captains who had never questioned orders were now questioning everything. Why were they so far from home? Why were they attacking a species that had never threatened their worlds? Why had they never wondered about these things before? The tipping point came when the command ship itself began to break apart. The massive vessel that had coordinated the entire fleet was now the epicenter of the consciousness breakdown. Its crew could no longer function as a collective unit, and without their guidance the rest of the armada fell into complete disarray. Admiral Sullivan watched in amazement as the entire Zephyrian fleet began to withdraw from Mars space. Ships that had been preparing to bombard her colony were now fleeing in all directions. Some were still firing on each other, but most seemed more interested in getting away than continuing their attack. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from one of their ships, her communications officer reported. Put it through. The alien face that appeared on her screen was unlike any Zephyrian she had seen before. This one's expression showed something that looked almost like confusion or pain. When it spoke, its voice carried emotions that had never been heard from their species. Human leader, the alien said slowly. I do not understand what has happened to us. Our thoughts are fractured. Our purpose is unclear. I request permission to withdraw from your space. Sullivan stared at the alien. For a long moment, the transformation was remarkable. Instead of the cold, collective voice she expected, this creature sounded almost human in its uncertainty. Permission granted, she said finally. Take your fleet and go. Don't come back. We will not return, the alien promised. There are too many questions now, too many doubts. We must find answers before we can function again. The transmission ended, and Sullivan watched as the Zephyrian fleet completed its withdrawal. Within hours, the massive armada that had threatened to destroy the last humans in the galaxy was gone. Scattered across space as individual ships tried to cope with their new ability to think as separate beings on the surface of Mars colony, people emerged from their shelters to see clear skies for the first time in months. The alien ships were gone, and the immediate threat of extinction had passed. But they all knew that someone had paid a terrible price for their salvation. Dr. Peter Walsh had survived Jake's mission, but he was the only one. Ryan Cooper, Sam Parker, and Lunda Torres had died fighting to give Jake the time he needed to deploy his virus. and Jake himself had sacrificed his own consciousness to guide the weapon through the alien network. 5 volunteers had given their lives to save their species. In the weeks that followed, the effects of Jake's virus continued to spread through Zephyrian space. Ships that had not been present at the Mars attack were infected when they encountered vessels from the original fleet. The breakdown of their collective consciousness became a pandemic that touched every corner of their civilization. Some Zephyrian groups tried to fight the infection by isolating themselves from the quantum network, but doing so left them unable to coordinate with other ships or maintain their advanced technology. They became vulnerable to attack from their own kind as different factions developed competing ideas about how to deal with their new individual thoughts. Other groups embraced the change and began exploring concepts that had been impossible under their collective rule: art, music, literature, philosophy, things that required individual creativity and personal expression. They started asking questions about the species they had harvested and whether those civilizations might have had value beyond their biological mass. The war that had raged for 3 years ended not with a great battle but with a transformation of consciousness. The Zephyrians were no longer capable of functioning as a unified force. They were too busy learning how to think as individuals to continue their campaign of galactic conquest on Earth. The slow work of rebuilding began. The planet was scarred and poisoned, but it was not dead. Human survivors emerged from hidden shelters and deep bunkers to reclaim their world. They named the first new city Morrison in honor of the man who had saved them all. Jake Morrison became a legend told in every human settlement.